For a few seconds, Abednego held onto the note, squeezing it in his palm while hot tears rolled down his face. He had never known that Donatus could betray him in such a way. He sat on his bed, thinking about how much he had told Donatus and how much the other man knew. Abednego's heart kept pounding while he bit his lips in anguish without feeling any pain. "Where is he? Where is that idiot boy?" a voice said, approaching Abednego's room and thundering. "Who could that be?" Abednego queried to himself as his whole body started to shiver. Then there came bangs on his door. "Open this door, useless boy," he heard. It was then that Abednego knew it was the voice of his landlord. The man said it, banging repeatedly on the door. Abednego managed to get up, walked slowly to the door and unbolted it with his shivering hand. Then he saw the landlord standing with two other men. "Goo! Good day, sir," Abednego stuttered, bowing his head. "Where is that foolish friend of yours? Where is he?" the landlord queried, thundering. His thundering voice immediately threw Abednego off balance, and his legs became so numb. "Sir, he has gone back to his hometown. I swear I know nothing about the death of your daughter. It was Donatus who impregnated her, sir. I don't have a hand in it," Abednego said with fear written all over his face. The landlord's jaw dropped immediately, popping his eyes like one who'd gone blind. "Donatus impregnated my daughter. Could it be that he was the one who took her for an abortion and then absconded after she died?" he queried, pointing into the air. "I am finished. This boy has killed me," he let out, dropping a tear with two hands on his head. "I never knew my daughter was pregnant until her death. I only came with these men. They are electric providing officials. I had given Donatus money since yesterday morning to help pay the electricity bill. Now the officials have come for disconnection, telling me that Donatus didn't show up at their office. That's why I'm here. But hearing this now has left me dumbfounded," he said, wiping his tears with the back of his hand. "What a pity boys of nowadays," one of the officials said, shaking his head. "My brother, see my life. These boys I took as my sons, see how they ended up ruining my life," the landlord said, bringing out his phone. "If it's what I'm thinking, then I'm finished," Abednego soliloquized. The landlord ended up calling the police, turning a deaf ear to Abednego's plea. He locked up Abednego's room, and they both waited outside in the compound for the police, who arrived after like 30 minutes, and Abednego was whisked away like a common criminal. They locked him up and asked him to provide Donatus. Then he would be released. Abednego begged them, telling them that Donatus had already left the house. But he was told that bringing Donatus would only facilitate his release, so he had no other option than to take the landlord and some officers all the way down to Donatus's hometown. Abednego had been there just once for Donatus's sister's wedding, but he still managed to find his way there after 4 years. They got to their compound, meeting Donatus's mom and two sisters outside. She got up all of a sudden as soon as she saw Abednego in cuffs and in the company of some officers, and started walking towards them while her two daughters followed. "Isn't this Donatus's friend?" she questioned, panicking. "Yes, Mom," Abednego said, then greeted her. He narrated what happened, and she told him that she hadn't set her eyes on Donatus for 2 years now. Donatus had played Abednego. Abednego didn't even know what he had done wrong to this guy to warrant that kind of betrayal. He stood there, hopeless and helpless, while hot tears rolled down his cheeks. What will I tell my mother happened?" Abednego muttered in tears. "Officers, let's go. He knows the whereabouts of his friend and he will confess after so much torture. And if he fails to confess, let him rot in jail," the landlord fumed. "Ah, Baba! Please, I don't know anything! Baba! Please, I'm innocent!" Abednego begged on his knees. "Officers, take him!" The landlord thundered again, turning his back. One of the officers held Abednego's trousers and started dragging him. "Sir, please, I'm innocent," Abednego begged amidst tears. He looked back and said to Donatus's mother, "Mama, please help me beg them." Then Abednego looked forward all of a sudden and saw the ghost lady standing right beside the police car. He was startled and he paused all of a sudden. He was the only one who saw her, so he tried as much as possible not to make them suspect anything. She raised her hand, drew a circle in the air, and then disappeared. "I don't understand. Is this ghost okay? Was that the only thing she could do to help? I'm doomed," Abednego thought to himself. "My friend, move!" One of the officers yelled at him. Then the landlord, who was walking ahead of them, paused all of a sudden and then turned back. "Officers, please release the boy. You can take Donatus's mom instead," he said. "Sir?" One of the officers questioned to be sure of what he had heard, and the landlord repeated the same thing. Abednego was let go of immediately, and they went ahead to take Donatus's mother and then put her in their car. "Abednego, please come into the car. Let's drop you home. Please," said the landlord. "Sir, come into the police car." "No, I can't. Don't worry, just go. I'll find my way home," Abednego said. Then the landlord dipped his hand into his pocket and gave Abednego some money for his transport fare back home. Abednego arrived home and went to where he hid his spare key. He collected it, bathed, picked up a few of his clothes, and left the house for Damian's grandmother's place. She was stunned as soon as she saw him, with a swollen face. Abednego ended up narrating everything to her, and she really felt sorry. That night, the grandmother slept and saw her ghost daughter in the dream, telling her to hurry up and go and bring her other son the following day. The next morning, the grandmother told Abednego about it, and they wanted to leave for the city to Agada's place in the company of some police officers. But it rained heavily, and they had to wait until the following day. The grandmother kept wondering if it was the right decision, even though she didn't know why her ghost daughter wanted her to go get the boy so urgently. The next day they went to the city, then reported at a police station. They went to Agada's house, but the gate was flung open without a lock, and the security man was nowhere to be found. The grandmother and Abednego turned and looked at each other. They hurried inside the house, and 2 officers went with them. But the house was all empty and deserted. The grandmother immediately put her 2 hands on her head, wailing uncontrollably, and started rolling on the floor. Abednego hurried to her and started to console her, trying to help her up. But she refused. It took the efforts of the officers around before she finally got up. They left the deserted house and went back to the police station to make another report. They were there when Abednego told the grandmother that he wanted to go to his house to pick up a few clothes because he had picked up very few before traveling the other time. Abednego arrived at his house and started picking up some clothes in a hurry. Then he heard a very loud bang on their gate. He looked outside the window and saw 3 guys dressed in all black coming towards his room. At first, he thought they were robbers. On a second thought, what if they were actually coming for him? He picked up his bag and dashed out of his room without locking his door, and he took the back route and went to hide in a neighbor's room. He was there when he peeped through his neighbor's window, and lo and behold, he saw Agada standing with Donatus close to the gate, smoking. Abednego was shocked and almost said something to them, but his neighbor covered his mouth as they stood there watching them from his window. After a few minutes, they all left. Then Abednego went to bring out his phone from his pocket, but his pocket was empty. "What?" he exclaimed all of a sudden. "What is it?" his neighbor queried. "I left my phone in my room," Abednego said. They both hurried into Abednego's room. He found everything ransacked. Abednego and his neighbor searched for the phone, but couldn't find it. The neighbor tried calling Abednego's phone, but it was already switched off. Abednego stood there, devastated. He knew how much it had taken him to get that phone. He stood there with different thoughts running through his mind as tears flowed freely down his cheeks. His neighbor came to him with a hand placed on his shoulder. "Come on, man. Just cheer up. All will be well. I don't know what transpired between you and Donatus yet, but I'll write my number on a piece of paper for you so we can talk when you're calm. Let me know everything, so I'll know how to take it up. But I'll advise you to go out of here as soon as possible. Seriously, I'll not want you to spend your money on all these. I really appreciate it, but if you decide to take it up, you might be putting your life at risk and also end up spending much money," Abednego said. "Don't worry about that, Abednego. I know all of you here in the compound don't know that I'm working with the State Security Service. Just let me know all that transpired between you and Donatus," he said, grinning. Abednego's jaw dropped. "Are you serious? I never knew," he said. Abednego had truly never known, because the guy didn't even look like one who was into such a profession. He looked more like someone working in a zoo because he never cared about dressing well at all. He wouldn't even mind tying a wrapper under a polo shirt and going out with it. His dress sense was that bad. "Yes, of course," the neighbor said. Then they shook hands and gave each other a goodbye hug. Abednego left and went back to the police station. The grandmother was already outside, restless and pacing up and down. "Abednego, what took you so long?" she queried. Abednego narrated everything to her, and she was dumbfounded. "I'm so sorry about all you're going through because of us. But don't you think you should opt out of this already for your safety?" "No, Mama. If I perish, I perish. It's already too late to back out." She looked at him, smiling from ear to ear. Abednego really loved that smile, because he hadn't seen her smile since they arrived in the city. "God bless you, my son." "Amen, Ma'am," Abednego said, bowing his head. They finally left and went back to the village. As soon as they arrived, the grandmother went straight into her room, locking herself up, and they could hear her crying. Then Damian came to Abednego in his room after a few minutes. "Uncle, why has Grandma been crying ever since you got back?" he questioned. Abednego sighed, thinking of how best to explain to him, because he felt Damian needed to know since he was the medium. "Let him tell his ghost mom. Maybe she can do something," Abednego soliloquized. He made Damian sit beside him on the bed. "Damian, your twin brother is missing. That's why Grandma's crying," Abednego said. "But I don't have a twin brother," Damian said. "You do. Remember that little boy you saw on my phone the other day?" Damian nodded. "That's your twin brother. We don't know where he is, and it's not safe being around those people he's with presently, so Grandma wants him home," Abednego said. Damian turned swiftly, staring at the wall before them. "Aeon, ghost summoner, time for action has come," Abednego muttered as he adjusted himself. "Mum, have you gone to sleep? My twin brother is missing and Grandma has been crying and you're doing nothing about it," Damian said, as tears welled up in his eyes. His ghost mom appeared on the wall all of a sudden. The way she appeared, one could tell that she wasn't happy at all. She looked so angry and wore a squeezed face, Abednego was so scared to look at her the second time because of the way he saw her. She looked at Abednego, then at Damian, and then disappeared again. The room was immediately filled with smoke as soon as she left. The grandmother came out later that evening. Her eyes were all swollen and red. Abednego took her phone and called the State Security Service guy, and then narrated everything from A to Z. The officer asked for the boy's pictures, but Abednego told him that the pictures of Damian's twin he had taken were in that phone that was taken. But he took Damian's pictures and sent them to him, and told him that both of them looked so identical, so he could use Damian's picture instead to search for the other twin. 3 days later, the State Security Service guy called Abednego and told him that they had found Damian's twin. Abednego was flabbergasted as he stood up from the couch all of a sudden, and the grandmother's phone nearly fell off his hand. The grandmother got up as soon as she saw his reaction. "How? Where?" Abednego queried. "He was dumped in an orphanage home," the guy said. The State Security Service guy ended the call, and Abednego slowly dropped the phone from his ear. The grandmother, who couldn't wait to hear why Abednego had been called, was already trying to ask him what was going on with her actions, staring at him and popping her eyes. "What is it? Talk to me," she said. "Mama, they found the other twin in an orphanage," Abednego let out. "An orphanage? Please put on your clothes, let's go," she said, pacing around. "No, Mama, please, let's leave the traveling till tomorrow, it's already getting late." "What if they go back to that orphanage to take him? Please, Abednego, let's go." "Or should I go alone?" she queried. "No, Mama, let's wait till tomorrow. Nothing will happen to him, I'm sure of that." "I pray so," she said. That night, they were in bed when Abednego started hearing strange sounds from outside. He peeped through the window but found no one. He was already so scared, so he went back to bed, covering himself with a wrapper from head to toe. The next morning, Abednego heard a very loud scream coming from the girl who used to stay with the grandmother. He jerked up and sat up, but the scream continued, coming from outside. Abednego hurried out of the room, and the grandmother and he bumped into each other at the corridor. "What is it? What's going on?" she queried, hurrying out. "I don't know," Abednego said, hurrying after her. They went outside, and then saw 4 guys sweeping the compound as if their lives depended on it. They were sweeping without their shirts on, and at the same time, sweating profusely. The grandmother and Abednego looked at each other, then at the girl staying with her. "Who are they?" she questioned the girl. "I don't know. I met them here when I opened the door." Then she turned to the 4 guys. Abednego was already hiding behind the grandmother and shivering. "Who are you?" she asked, but they ignored her and continued sweeping. "I say, who are you?" she questioned again, but they were still sweeping without uttering a word. It was only in movies that Abednego had ever seen such a thing. He was still behind the grandmother, peeping. Yes, he was a man, but when it came to such things, he quickly withdrew so that his eyes would not see evil. "Who are you?" The grandmother was still busy questioning. The grandmother looked back all of a sudden. "Abednego, please get me my phone." "Ma, me," Abednego exclaimed with a hand on his chest. "Ah," he exclaimed again, looking around. Then he called the girl staying with the grandmother by her name and asked her to go bring the phone. She arrived with it after a few seconds, and the grandmother called the local police officers, who arrived in no time. The 4 men were taken away. It was there that one of them confessed that it was Agada who had sent them. As soon as the grandmother arrived from the police station to tell Abednego that, He went into the room and picked up his things, telling her he was going to his hometown. But the grandmother stopped him and assured him that he was safe there in their house. Like 2 hours later, they left for the city with Damian. They arrived at the orphanage and saw the other twin. As soon as the little boys saw each other, they stood before each other, looking into each other's eyes. The grandmother and Abednego just stood there, smiling from ear to ear amidst tears. "Who is he?" the grandmother queried, pointing at the twin. "It's me, he's carrying my face," Damian said, touching his twin's face. They laughed, and the other twin opened his arms wide for a hug. They hugged each other so tightly. The grandmother went and knelt beside them, holding each of them in her arms, and cried at the same time, praying for them. It was such a beautiful and emotional sight to behold. Abednego took the grandmother's phone and called the state security service guy, but he wasn't picking up. So the grandmother and Abednego went to see the owner of the orphanage to tell him they wanted to take Damian's twin. But he told them it wasn't that easy, and told them the necessary steps they needed to take. The grandmother was ready to take those steps that very day, but Abednego told her to allow them to do things gradually. So they made a report at the police station first, then returned in 2 days for those steps to be carried out. When they were about to leave, Damian's twin didn't want them to go. He and Damian held hands and didn't want to leave each other. Damian, too, didn't want to leave without his twin. So the owner of the orphanage said they could leave Damian behind with his twin. The grandmother was scared and skeptical at first, but they were told that he was in safe hands. Well, they returned home without Damian. That day, as soon as they got home, the state security service guy gave Abednego a call that they had apprehended a guarder. Abednego was happy and sad at the same time. Happy because the grandmother and the other twin were finally going to get justice, and sad because he took part in a guarder's arrest. The grandmother was so happy that she threw a mini party that night, sharing food with all the neighbors. The following day, again, the grandmother and Abednego set out to the police station in the city. As soon as a guarder was brought out of the cell and set his eyes on Abednego, he became violent. Thank God he was cuffed. You betrayed me!" he thundered. The rage from his voice nearly threw Abednego off his feet. "I'm sorry," Abednego begged. "You're a coward and a fool. You must surely pay for this," he raged, struggling with the cuffs on his hands. He was put back in the cell, and they were asked to come back after like an hour when the chief police was around. They left the police station to the orphanage, and after they had carried out those necessary steps, Damian's twin was released to them. After some hours, they returned to the police station again. As soon as Damian's twin saw a guarder, because he was again brought out, he ran to him, giving him a hug. "Please leave my daddy alone," he said, still hugging him, and they all burst into tears. The officers started questioning him about the documents. He didn't want to confess at first, but later did after much torture. It was revealed by him that Donatus had gone to his sugar mummy to tell her about all his plans. Now Donatus and his sugar mummy had sold off some properties and had absconded with the remaining documents after dumping Damian's twin at the orphanage. He got to know all this when Donatus himself called him, telling him that he wasn't smart enough and that he had been outsmarted. "Please leave my daddy alone. Remove this thing from his hands," Damian's twin protested, dragging the cuffs on a guarder's hands. "See, Andre, I will be fine, okay? Look, I'm not your daddy. That's your grandmother over there, and you need to go home with her," a guarder said while dropping a tear. Abednego really felt for him. He even tried talking to him, but a guarder shut him up. When the officers were taking him into the cell, Damian's twin started fighting them to leave him alone, but the grandmother quickly came and carried him. One question that had been pricking Abednego's heart till that date was, "Do you think I betrayed Agada?" But he knew he did the right thing. The grandmother, Abednego, and the twins left the police station very late, so they arrived at the village in the middle of the night. Till they reached home, Damian and his twin were inseparable. They sat close to each other, holding hands. They even slept off, leaning on each other, and still holding hands. They would have gone to the grandmother's daughter's house in the city to pass the night, but she had once told them that she couldn't accommodate them, so they stopped involving her. Chai! The bond between them is just so strong. Since I don't have twins, whenever I see one, I always pray that my children would birth twins so I would have them as grandchildren. One of the travelers in the same car they boarded let out, watching them sleep as they held hands. The grandmother just sat there, smiling at the woman. They finally arrived home. The grandmother managed to make tea and fried eggs, and they headed immediately to bed after eating. Let Abednego call it breakfast, because it was already a few minutes to 1 a.m. Abednego was deeply asleep when he started feeling this very cool breeze. He was freezing. He jerked up and hurried to the door of the wardrobe where he had hung the wrapper the grandmother gave him to cover up. He laid on the bed, and in an attempt to cover himself, he saw this faded image on the wall, backing him. He was stunned. His jaw dropped, and the whole of his body became so numb. He wanted to shout, but his mouth suddenly became too heavy to open. Then the image turned, facing him, and lo and behold, it was the ghost lady. She stood there with a broad smile, waving at him at the same time. Then he finally summoned the courage to speak after regaining himself. You scared me. I'm sorry. I no longer have much time left on Earth. Please tell Mama and my boys that I love them so much. Thank you so much for all you've done for me. At least now I can go and rest peacefully. That account you once took money from? I hope you still remember the PIN. I have 10 million naira left in there. Tell Mama to take you and the boys to the bank I used to operate to see the manager. She knows there. The manager knows how to hand over the money to you guys. And for my remaining properties, please sell the 2 houses and settle Mama from all the proceeds. But don't touch the 6 plots of land. The addresses are written on the documents. As soon as the boys turn 18, give them 3 plots of land each. Take Mama and the boys out of the country for proper education, and please take good care of them. I trust you. That was why I chose you for the task. My sister will come for her own share. I'm sure of that. Give her just 1 million naira. Tell Damian I'm going to miss him so much. Tell his twin that I'm sorry the way things turned out. Let them both know that I'll always love and protect them. And please, call the other twin Diamond. Thank Mama for her bravery. Tell her I said she's the best mother in the world. Thank you so much once again. I'm grateful, she said, and then disappeared, waving at him. But the documents? Abednego let out, but she had already gone. He cried, tears of joy and sadness. He couldn't even close his eyes until morning, and he couldn't wait to break the news to the grandmother. As soon as he heard the grandmother's voice that morning, he went to her and told her everything. She started eulogizing and praying for her daughter, and then broke down in tears in the process. Abednego went to her and hugged her. The grandmother looked straight into his eyes. If not for you, all these wouldn't have been possible. You're still a very young man. Go with the kids abroad. Let me be here. I prefer it here. But Mama, she said, I know, my son. but I want to remain here." "May God bless you," she said, placing a hand on his head. Abednego nodded. A few hours later, Abednego was relaxing outside and surfing the net with the grandmother's phone when he stumbled upon news on the internet with a woman's picture. He saw the picture but scrolled down to read the news. It happened that the woman was killed in a hotel by her younger lover. Abednego's jaw dropped, with the phone still glued to his face. Then he hurried to the grandmother's room. "Mama, see," he said, panting and showing her the phone screen. She grabbed the phone and looked at it. Then she covered her mouth all of a sudden with one hand. The picture was that of Agada's acclaimed mother, who later happened to be his sugar mommy. Abednego took back the phone and then called the State Security Service guy, who told Abednego that he had been trying to reach them. He said that the woman's dead body was found in a hotel room but without the documents, as Donatus had gone away with them. The following week, they went to the bank to cash out the money. Abednego was there in the manager's office when he sighted someone through the glass doors standing outside, trying to come in. The person was adjusting his face cap, looking sideways almost every minute. Abednego rubbed his eyes. "No, my eyes can't be deceiving me," he soliloquized. It was Donatus. He was still wearing that face cap that looked like the tail of a fish. Despite the cash-outs he must have made, he still wore old clothes. Abednego tapped the grandmother and requested her phone. He didn't tell her anything. He called the State Security Service guy, but by the time he reached there, Donatus had already done his transactions and left. Abednego couldn't follow him. He was so scared of Donatus seeing him. The officers searched everywhere but couldn't find him. They left the bank very late, so they lodged in a hotel until the next day before proceeding to the village. The next day, they arrived in the village and saw a man kneeling in front of the house with some papers in his hands. Abednego was dumbfounded. At first, he thought it was a witch doctor or something. Only the grandmother had the courage to go check who it was. As soon as she saw the face, she beckoned Abednego over. "No, Mama, I can't come," Abednego said. "Come here, come and see," she said. Then Abednego walked slowly to where the grandmother was standing. As soon as he saw the man's face, his eyes popped open. "Donatus," he exclaimed. Well, Donatus was later arrested. That night, Abednego couldn't even close his eyes. He was overjoyed. So he was finally going to travel abroad just like that. I have finally arrived. My first day abroad, I will just sit in the middle of the road, not minding the cars that are passing, he muttered, smiling sheepishly. The next morning, Abednego went into Damian and Diamond's room, but he found Damian crying. "What's wrong?" he queried. "I have been calling Mommy, but she isn't responding," Damian said amidst tears. "Come here," Abednego said, opening his arms wide for a hug from both of them. The end. Please subscribe to this channel and turn on the bell notification as we drop beautiful, captivating stories every 3 days. We love you.